Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webcast. My name is Christine Dorsey Davis. I'm the Executive Director of the Ohio chapter of the American Planning Association and Chair of APA's New Urbanism Division, and I'm your webcast moderator. Today is Friday, August 23rd. We will be hearing the presentation Lean Thinking Before, During, and After Your Planning Process. For technical help during today's webcast, you can type your questions in the chat box found in the webcast toolbar to the right of your screen. For content questions related to the presentation, you can again type those in the box located in the webinar toolbar to the right of your screen, and we will answer those at the end of the presentation during the Q&A. Coming up on your screen is a list of our sponsoring chapters and divisions for 2019. So thanks to all of those participating chapters and divisions for making these webcasts possible and free to members. Today in particular, our webcast is sponsored by the Ohio chapter of APA. So thank you, APA Ohio, for joining us today. Coming up on your screen next is a list of our upcoming webcasts. You can see the list here. We have a lot of coming soons, so make sure that you stay up to date by visiting our webcast webpage, ohioplanning.org/planning webcast, to get all of the updated and latest and greatest information. I can't believe it. We're almost into December here. Coming up next, to log your CM credits for attending today's webcast, just head over to planning.org and log into your My APA account. And from there, you can search by the activity, today's title, or the event number. And that is not the correct event number. I forgot to switch it out. So I will be sure to have that posted up on our webcast webpage. So again, you can always just search for the title and it'll pop up. This webcast has been approved for 1.5 CM credits for live viewing only. We do have some recorded webcasts that are available for distance education, and you can check out all of those opportunities again on our webcast webpage, ohioplanning.org/planning webcast. Like us on Facebook, Planning Webcast Series, for up-to-date information on our sessions. And subscribe to our channel on YouTube. We have over 2,000 subscribers and over 300 of our webcasts recorded. Just head over to YouTube and search Planning Webcast. And we are recording today's webcast, and we're going to post it up onto our YouTube channel at the conclusion of today's session. That's it for my introduction. So I am going to turn it over to Rachel Ray, who will kick us off. Rachel, I just turn the controls over to you.
Thanks, Christine. Hello and welcome, everyone. Again, my name is Rachel Ray, and I'm an Economic Development Administrator for the City of Dublin, Ohio. I've been doing this for about 4 years, and previously I spent about 8 years in our planning department here at Dublin. It's a great place to work, and I haven't been able to leave. So I will have my colleagues that will be speaking with me today introduce themselves shortly. But all three of us are really passionate about this topic of Lean Six Sigma and how that kind of remixes with planning and development. So we're really excited to talk with you all today. And really our goal is to make this a really fun, hopefully informative, and also an interactive session. So at this point, I'd like to start by asking my colleague, Tracy Owens, to kick things off and give a brief introduction of himself.
Thank you, Rachel. I'm Tracy Owens. I've been a Lean and Six Sigma practitioner for 20 years now in a lot of different settings: automotive manufacturing, medical device manufacturing, insurance and finance and back offices, and in the last 5 years with city governments. And one of the things that I can tell you safely is that lean thinking, lean techniques, many of which we'll share with you today, several of which we'll share with you today, they work anywhere, no matter what setting you are working in or living in, or volunteering with. Lean is helpful. It makes things easier, I guess there's one caveat. My wife has always told me, you keep that lean thinking out of my kitchen. So there's, I guess, one limitation on my own activities. But otherwise, it's been extremely positive. I just want to share with you a little bit about what we're going to try to accomplish today. We want, as I mentioned a second ago, to make life simpler for you and for those who do business with you, your customers, your clients, your residents, developers. We want to make life simpler. That's why we're here. So what we're going to do is look at the work you do and analyze it, not in the greatest level of detail. We can only scratch the surface on Lean and Six Sigma, chiefly Lean thinking today. But what it's mainly about is taking a much closer look at the work that is done and looking for the things that are adding value, the things that are actually necessary in order to accomplish that work, and the things that maybe aren't as important but seem like they are, or perhaps they were in years past and no longer are. So we'll take a look at 9 specific tools that you can use today. And the way that they break down is there are some that you would use actually before you do the work, and there are some that you will use during, while the work is being done, to try to evaluate it and make things simpler. And then after the work is done as well, you'll be able to reevaluate the process and see. So for process analysis before, during, and after is our focus today. We do want to we want to share our themes on practical application of Lean in the workplace and give you a chance to contribute through the chat window and through the questions box any practical application that you can foresee in using Lean thinking also. And as Christine mentioned, we'll have some time for questions. So just as the briefest introduction to Lean, the main tool that's used for process analysis is the process map. And there's a picture of one here. It's a little image that we captured during one of our own process improvement workshops. And the colors and the shapes are all intended to direct your eye toward where attention is needed. For instance, the ones that have a red corner on them. Will help you to identify where improvement opportunities lie. There are always opportunities for improvement, even when things seem to be going extremely well. We have done a number of these workshops here in Dublin, and Devyani Puranik, our colleague, is going to go into a little bit about how we've deployed Lean here in the City of Dublin.
Thank you, Tracy. Good afternoon. This is Devyani Puranik. I work as a senior planner for the City of Dublin. And Rachel and myself, we both are certified Six Sigma Black Belts. I'm actually since 2018, and Rachel is recent 2019 Six Sigma Black Belt professional. I manage long-range planning projects for the City of Dublin, and several of the tools that Tracy just mentioned have been really helpful for me in long-range planning projects to improve efficiency, not just for the projects, but my day-to-day tasks. And hopefully you will find these valuable for your work as well. For those who are not familiar with the City of Dublin, Dublin is a city of about 50,000 residents located northwest of City of Columbus in Ohio. We are known in the region as very innovative, forward-thinking, and performance-based organization. And in last 5 years, since 2014, Tracy came in our organization with her City Managers Initiative. We have adapted Lean Six Sigma thinking process as a culture for the organization. And as part of that, we have created inter-departmental and very collaborative team called PyWorks, as you can see here on the screen here. Tracy mentors us, teaches us through the process. P in PyWorks stands for process improvement, I is for innovation, and E is for engagement. The team consists of 13 black belts, meaning we went through 3-month-long training once a week with Tracy and appeared for 4.5-hour-long exam and passed it, thankfully. We sit on this team, so Rachel and I, we both are part of this team. We have 40 plus green and yellow belts, meaning they did not have to go through this exam, but they do understand the terminology, they understand the concepts, we all speak the same language, and it's again to have this culture of continuous improvement throughout the organization. As part of this team, we have completed over 40 different process improvement projects, and Tracy can talk about that, but most of those have resulted in improvements in efficiency, effectiveness, cost reductions, team management, stakeholder management. The benefits are endless. So we are, like Rachel said, we are passionate about this concept, and we try to include it in our day-to-day work.
Good. Okay, so I'd like to ask Christine's help. We're going to ask or have our first poll question here. We'd like to get a sense of who our audience is today. So hopefully as we go through the presentation, we can try to tailor what we talk about to the types of information or scenarios that would have value for you. Christine, are you around?
I'm here. So everyone, up on your screen, you should see a poll that just popped up. So we want to know which category best describes your current professional practice. So you have a couple options there. So go ahead and put in your vote, and we'll just wait a few moments, and then we can close the poll and show those results. So go ahead and click in.
Well, I'll go ahead and start talking here while everyone finishes selecting their answers. But try to think about a couple of different, whether you're from the public sector or the private sector, or perhaps you're a student just kind of learning more about planning and ways to do planning. Perhaps if you're used to dealing with planning commission members, and sometimes they complain about not having enough information or the right information to make informed decisions. Or perhaps you work for a private planning consulting firm, and you're used to working with communities and interested in how you can deliver services to best meet the needs of your customer, which is the community you're consulting for, as well as their constituents. Or perhaps you work for a DOT or a larger regional metropolitan planning organization, and you have many stakeholders and political partners to work with. All of these are scenarios where lean can really be effective. So let's hop back over to the poll here. It looks like we got responses in.
Yeah, we do have the results. So it looks like half of us are from the public sector, specifically local government. And then next is 28% are in the private sector, 10% state and regional public sector planning, 10% other, and a mighty 1% of students. So I'm going to go ahead and close this and then throw your screen back up. And
excellent. Thanks.
You're good. Of course.
Okay, perfect. So again, hopefully you'll, as we go through this, be able to kind of imagine how some of these tools can apply directly to the type of work that you do. And if you're in that vague other category, we'd love to hear from you more about your work and perhaps how you can see these tools applying. So again, the point here is really that these areas can all be improved through the Lean Six Sigma process, and most importantly, help you really get it right the first time around.
So we mentioned that we're going to look at evaluating the work that you do. We call it a process. A process, just in general terms, taking some amount of inputs, whether it's information or forms or tools or materials, somehow taking action on those inputs and turning them into outputs. A number of those outputs, those results, should add value or be valuable, something that somebody wants. Some of those outputs are negative byproducts, and they need to be evaluated also. So if you look at your process, to pick it apart, to evaluate it, analyze it, the work that you do before, the evaluation you can do before the work is done, during, while the work is being done, and after the work is done, then you'll have a complete and comprehensive picture of where your opportunities for improvement lie. But what we want to do today is back it up. We want to analyze the process from back to front. So we're going to turn this inside out, and our first, we'll look at the post-work evaluation and then look at the during work, because the reason why we want to do this is because what's most important and what's a primary principle in lean thinking is to invest the necessary time and effort up front, and you will save yourself time and cost and headaches later. So we're going to focus on the after and the during, before the before, so that we can focus sharply on what kind of things will lead to success during your process. So that's why we're turning it kind of backward, turning it on its head. So first, we'll look at the post-process evaluation, a couple post-process evaluation items you can do, and this is intended to be very practical, things that you can do next week, right? Get back in the office, not assuming that everyone is sunning them, him or herself on a beach today listening to this, webcast. Maybe you could still take action later today, but that might be a bit ambitious. But next week, things that you can actually do back in your workplace. So, beginning with the end in mind, which is one of the 7 habits of highly effective people, is going to be where we start. So we have a kind of a billboard. We have an introductory billboard for each of our sections, and this is going to show. We're going to show you the 3 things that we are going to focus on in post-process evaluation. First thing is metrics. Please don't feel or express any hesitation or frustration with the algebraic expression there. It's only meant to show that the things that we measure are the things that get attention, and the things that we measure should not just be the results of the process or why, they should also be the input variables as well. And Rachel will go into that in a little more detail in just a minute. We're going to play a little game with you that we most usually play in a conference room, and it's called My Worst Nightmare. We're going to see how that works virtually, and I'll introduce that in just a second here. And then we also want to spend a little time talking about error proofing, which after you've done the work, you can look back at how any mistakes or problems arose and figure out how to prevent them from happening in the first place. Sound good?
Yeah.
All right. So let me introduce this. One of the things that Rachel and Devyani and I did earlier this year was we had a session where we talked to a room full of people about public meetings, which is I don't know, some view it as a necessary evil, but it's certainly an important thing, an important element of getting the voice of your public, getting the voice of the constituents and the customers. And so in order to get those people into a room, you might try a number of techniques. Well, what we want to do is look at the ways that you can identify potential problems in promoting attendance at a public meeting. And to do that, we're going to play My Worst Nightmare. As I mentioned, it's a game we normally play in a conference room, so we ask people to write sticky notes, with the worst thing that could happen in a public meeting, and we ask them to put them on the board so we can all see, put them on, on the whiteboard or on the wall so we can all see what they are. You are a virtual audience, and we're happy to have you, so we're going to try 2 different approaches to this, 2 different approaches. We want you to give us your worst nightmare, and by the way, if I ever do this, sometimes this exercise, give me my worst nightmare, I might introduce it like going to the coffee shop in the morning. Like, let's say, just as an introductory, you go to the coffee shop, you want to get coffee and a pastry, what's your worst nightmare? And some people will actually write on a sticky note or raise their hand and say, well, the coffee is cold. And I can't help but say, really, is that your worst nightmare? So when they start saying, well, okay, I find a cockroach in the coffee, now I'm thinking, okay, now we're in tune. So we're looking for the worst nightmare. So we're going to give you 2 outlets, and hopefully those of you with us on the phone will choose one or the other. There's a website, there's a URL listed here, scrumbler.ca/MWNOG23. You can go to that site and give us sticky notes. Click the little plus sign and give us a sticky note with your idea. Put it on that board there. We also want to ask you in the question box, Christine, I think question box or chat box, question box is what we agreed to. Give us your worst nightmare for promoting attendance at public meetings. We're going to continue with the presentation and then come back to show you the results in just a couple of minutes.
Okay. All right. So while you are submitting your feedback into the chat box or going to the Scrumbler site, I'm going to start talking about measures of success. So this is the one that Tracy referenced as the algebraic equation, but there's really no math involved, I promise. So many communities are increasingly driving towards performance metrics, and of course the City of Dublin is no exception. Our city manager is well known for asking the question, how do we know we're winning? When directors see him coming down the hallway, they know to get ready with an answer to that question. So with that question, how do we know we're winning? There's an implicit emphasis on the whys, if you think about it as an equation, or the outcomes. So performance measurement can be really difficult, though, as planners and those in this profession can agree with, particularly in complex processes like obtaining a planning approval or a zoning permit or even an economic development agreement that are dependent on many different steps, sub-processes, different players, not to mention the politics that can cause a process to go awry. But with a lean mindset, though, there are tools that you can use to better answer the question, are we winning? And really that comes into studying the process inputs just as much as the outputs. So one of the tools that I like to use is called a SIPOC diagram, which I'll get to talk about later, and is my new favorite go-to tool. And it's a great way to help define the X's in your process. But this here is a simple diagram on the screen called a tree diagram. And the very top here, permit is received. That's the outcome for this particular process illustrated here. All of those actions and steps leading up to receiving the permit are the X's, the drivers or the inputs in the process. So defining that can help you determine, one, if there is success, what were the drivers? How do you measure each of those different X's? And on the other hand, if there's failure, what were the drivers that resulted in that failure? So, and as we'll talk about with tools coming up here, each of those can have different steps, whether it's process mapping or error proofing, which Tracy will talk about next. Really the key here is that metrics and how you define each of those individual steps are important because it's measuring the inputs as well as the results that will better help you predict success and prevent failure at the end with the end result. So I'll keep going here.
Excellent, thank you. Let's bring up the topic of error proofing, and it's ideal, to prevent a mistake. We like to say it's good to do things right the first time, but it's even better to prevent things from being done wrong the first time. So there are a couple of types of error proofing, and I'll show you a bit of a hierarchy of error proofing methods here in a second. But really, sometimes it just breaks down to soft controls and hard controls. And soft controls are kind of like the lines that are painted on the road. You still have to say pay attention. You still have to say be careful. If you have controls in place, where you still they're guidelines, but you still have to say be careful because a mistake can still be made. Those are soft controls. And by the way, I don't know how many finance representatives we have with us, but financial controls are inherently soft controls. Someone can still make a mistake. They can still do the wrong thing. They're not hard. Hard control then is, as the picture changes, that's more of the actual, the guardrail, the thing that prevents you from leaving the road surface. I guess if you really wanted to, it would take some effort, but the hard control is there to actually prevent you from making that mistake. Let me show you this hierarchy that we're talking about. And at the top is the most ideal, and that is elimination. Prevent even the possibility of an error. Eliminate steps, remove unnecessary work. For instance, if you've got a form that needs to be completed by an applicant, and they always botch that form, the elimination means remove that field. If they can't, the equivalent of elimination would be removing that field. If they can't get it right, let's not ask for it. Let's find another way to ask for it, which is really number 2, replacement. Take the way that's not working today and put in a more robust process, perhaps through automation, or having everyone use the same software in the same way so you're not collecting information from various people's different Word documents or spreadsheets or Lotus notes. That's still a thing. I'm sorry. If there's anybody from Lotus, on the phone, I apologize. But replacement then, take the thing that's not working and find a better way to do it. And facilitation is if there's a way where you can kind of lead, kind of guide the person doing this work toward the right decision through visual controls. Drop-down menus are extremely useful instead of asking someone to free-form type, even into an Excel field, because capital Y, capital E, capital S, yes, is different in Excel than capital Y, lowercase e, lowercase s. So having a drop-down menu helps. Color-coded folders even. This one is, for this part of the city. This one's for this other part of the city. Or color-coded saying this one has a 30-day turnaround, this one has a 10-day turnaround. Those top 3 are definitely focused on prevention of errors, preventing the error from happening. Number 4, detection is assuming that the error is difficult to prevent. It's likely that it will still happen. Let's focus on detection, making it easy to detect that the error has occurred, like the squiggly red line under a real-time spell checker. Keeping frequent measures so you can see when the process is starting to go astray. Like when Rachel mentioned some of the input metrics, if you're keeping track of those regularly, you can prevent bad output metrics. A sum reconciliation is one that I think is useful too. If you have two columns and you're adding in one column and you're verifying the sum in another column, that's also too. That's also useful. I think of detection as when I'm walking barefoot through the house and I kick, a piece of furniture with my little toe, I pretty much know instantly that happened. That's what we want. We want to know instantly that a problem has happened. And then number 5, assuming that the problem will happen, it's going to be difficult to detect. Let's at least mitigate the impact of that. Fuses are one way that has historically, let's put a weak link in there in the chain so it doesn't destroy the entire electrical system. Redundant servers, and possibly a no-hassle returns policy, assuming that we're not going to be able to get every, order or service every product exactly right. Let's at least make it easy for the customer to execute that return. One thing about this hierarchy, and I'll close with this. Why we present error proofing is because there's always another way. There's always another way to prevent an error from happening. And I always look at I always look at error proofing like a railroad crossing, Initially, there was just a sign with an X that said railroad crossing. And that wasn't enough to stop cars from getting hit by trains. And then the red flashing light was added, which is better, but it still didn't keep cars from getting hit by trains. And then the swing arm came down on one side of the road. And that was good, but it still didn't stop cars from getting hit by trains. And then to go to quiet zones, don't you have to have like 2 arms and a pedestrian arm and stuff? And that's good, but if you really want to try to dash across those tracks, it can still happen. I think the only safe way is overpass. That's elimination right there. So we're talking a little bit about error proofing. Now, I can hardly wait to see these results, Devyani, from the...
Yes, let's look at that. Christine, did you get a chance to put up the My Worst Nightmare poll?
Hold on one second.
Oh, we got some Scrumbler entries we can take a peek at.
Yeah, there we go.
Oh, lightning hits the room full of people. Yes, that can happen. Let's see. Earthquake during meeting. That can happen too.
Natural disasters, yeah.
Right. Nobody shows up. That's definitely my worst nightmare too. Let's see here. Rat infestation.
Rat infestation. Okay.
Yes, that might happen, but what can we do? Prepare with rat traps and bags to dispose it. So at least we will be prepared if that happens. We have to be ready with some measures. So this tool certainly helps, starting with literally what's the worst that can happen, helps to prevent them. This is really great innovation game that can be played with any planners, staff members, even admins in some cases, so we can be prepared in case of worst case scenario. This helps to identify problems before they happen. This tool has been also very helpful when there is audience with really negative outlook. It helps them to put it out there and collectively, collaboratively, you try to solve it. Let's see what else. Here on Scrum.
Zombies attack. Very likely scenario.
Jokes apart, this is a great tool, and we have played it in multiple different scenarios as a team building effort. The one project that I have been recently involved with was to hire seasonal employees, and we asked HR people what's the worst nightmare, and theirs was nobody applies, similar to here that nobody shows up at the meeting. So if that happens, what can you do? You have to be more prepared, send invitations, maybe door to door. I mean, there are different ways to mitigate this if this worst thing that happens. So it has been very successful in all different scenarios and different contexts.
Christine, did you happen to get the word cloud?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Let me
So we gave you two ways to contribute ideas. One through the Scrumbler site, which you can use, and some of you even picked up the dot stickers that can help to group or analyze things as well. And the other we did was to ask Christine to prepare this with the most frequently occurring terms that showed up.
Wow.
And it's really interesting and quite unfortunate. The number one response that I received was an active shooter or someone coming in with the intent to hurt violently. And then from there, we published the wrong dates, or everyone is disorderly. Everything from the door was locked and I don't have a key to, the air conditioning went out and everyone is rioting because it's hot, But the largest ones were by far an active shooter. No one shows up. Everyone's disorderly.
Sign of the times, certainly.
I mean, yes, all these have happened except for hopefully never active shooter. But in that case, I mean, all our meetings, as sad as it is, we have police presence at all our meetings, especially when elected officials are present. So again, this is just to show you that this tool is so helpful to prepare in case of worst case scenario.
All right.
Very good. So a couple of things that you can do after. Error-proof, make sure you're tracking the right metrics, and play the My Worst Nightmare game to prevent problems from happening. Now, moving to during the operation, we want to talk to you about monitoring the work, watching the work while it's happening in order to predict success. This is our billboard for what we'll cover during this time, and we want to talk a little bit about process mapping. We introduced that a second ago with a picture of a process map. So we want to go through briefly. We could talk to you for 9 hours about process mapping and still not have covered enough. So this is a very short period of time, but we want to give you a couple of useful basics that you can even use in the privacy of your own work location, your own office, starting as early as next week. We want to talk about first-time quality also, in kind of the theme that defects are bad. Yeah, scrap is bad, but rework, oh my goodness, can be just as bad. So we'll talk about that. And then we want to give you a tool, the Pareto chart. If you haven't seen it, we're going to introduce that to you, and we're going to give you an assignment. We're going to give you an assignment. So let's jump right in to start with process mapping.
Thank you, Tracy. Process mapping is a graphic tool which displays steps, events, and operations that make a process. It's an illustration which identifies the steps, inputs, outputs, and other related details of the process by providing a step-by-step illustration of the process in its as-is current situation. It is a team effort and is documented by everyone who contributes to the process or is part of the process. The example on the screen that you see here is a recent project that planning department went through. We staff a lot of boards and commissions, and we have to manage a lot of meeting documents between meeting agendas, minutes, ROAs, website. And in this case, we were duplicating our work multiple times. We had copies of the same document, multiple copies of the same document. We were emailing it to each other, assuming somebody else will do this work, or I'm supposed to. There was major confusion. So we realized we had an issue, and we went through this process mapping exercise. We got everyone in a room. It was a day-and-a-half long process. One of the black belts from Fireworks team, he led the process, and I supported him throughout this project. So as you see on the screen, on the left side, it has list of all different contributors. So from planning interns to admins to case manager. So it lists everybody who's involved in the process. And then all other colorful nodes, they show different steps, events, or events throughout this process. So as soon as we did that, we realized there were red flags, or there was duplication, there was repetition, there was waste in the process. And because everyone was in the team, we all could really identify it together as a team. After this exercise, we went through another process where we documented a process that we would like to implement. And within just a week or so, we have improved results, almost 30% reduction in duplication, and has really been very successful in terms of who is doing what and how the process works. So process mapping usually helps to create a visual of work being done so that everyone can see what each other is doing or what each other does. Often some improvements can be uncovered just by drawing the process map. So this has been really successful example of process mapping in our planning department projects that we do every day.
The next bit on process mapping, we want to look at the map itself once it's on the wall, and then look at each step. As Devyani mentioned, each little step in the process got its own box, and in each of those boxes is either adding value for the customer, meaning driving to the final result, or it is not adding value. Some of those boxes on there are not important to the customer. Some of the boxes on that process map are things that are not actually adding what the customer needs. The value-adding process steps, I'm in the middle here now, are either those boxes, those little process boxes that either produce the value, they actually turn inputs into outputs, as we talked about, and we would turn those generally green. We would turn those boxes indicate with a green sticker or a green marker or green sticky note itself on those that really add the value. And it is not uncommon when the process map is drawn and evaluated to find somewhere around the 10% mark of all the boxes on the steps are the ones that actually produce the value or deliver the value, which is our other defining factor for value-adding process steps. Steps in the process that either produce the value or deliver it to the customer, those are the ones where we should focus our energy. We must minimize the other steps, all the other steps that we would sometimes turn red, to draw our attention to those as being non-value-adding process steps. Is what we would do. So what we want to ask now, we want to have a little activity. We have a little interactive activity for you. We're going to show you a poll. And before we do that, I want to just reinforce that on the poll, there are going to be just a couple activities. And we want you to put a check mark next to those or select the ones that add value for the customer, something that the customer cares about, something that either produces value or delivers what the customer wants to them. Something that is strictly internal is not going to be something that adds value for the customer. So let's put up the poll, Christine, and let's see how we do as far as evaluating these activities for whether they add value for the customer or not. The instruction again is check the ones that do add value. We'll give you a quiet 30 seconds on this.
Okay, it should be headed out now to everybody.
Oh, we can see it. Yes, thank you. Good. We're starting to, we're starting to see some. I think we're starting to see some results come in. We'll give you 10 more seconds. Good. Value-adding activities, things that the customer cares about. They either produce the value, the thing that the customer needs, or deliver that to the customer. So let's take a look, Christine.
Okay. Okay, the results are up on the screen.
Awesome. So let's talk through these real quick. Providing an application checklist, giving something to the customer that they will use to prepare their application. This is something that we would argue is of value. It's something that they need, something they absolutely need. It's going to help them, to get the desired results, to drive success. Completing the inspection card. We got a little bit less than half voted in favor of that one. And maybe your definition of completing the inspection card is a different one from another. If it's taking a blank inspection card and only initialing those inspections that'll be required during this project, sure, that seems pretty valuable. If it's at the other end, where the customer just has to keep a record of what inspections have been done, that might not be so value-adding just to keep a record. We should already know that. 3 levels of approval. I would like to talk with the 12% of people on that one who said that 3 levels of approval is value-adding. I'm sorry, I don't want to sound pithy or flippant or anything like that, but 3 levels of approval is typically not something that the customer cares about, seeing 3 levels of approval. They want to know that we in the organization know what we're talking about and don't have to send it to 3 different desks and wait during the time that is required for those 3 levels of approval. Department status update meetings. 35% said this is a value adding for the customer, and that is maybe your definition of department status update meeting differs from mine, but this was a trap. That's one that should have been a 0, because for us in our department to get around the table and talk to each other about our projects is not something that's important to the customer. Now, if your definition is different, where you invite the customers and the developers, to talk about what's going on with their project, I understand that, but we would have given that one a different name. And then deliver certificate of approval, that one should have been 100%. Giving that customer a certificate of their plan's approval, handing that to them, that is the thing that they need. It's the reason they called you. And giving that to them is the top priority. So that's the big why at the end of all this. So I know I gave you about 2 minutes of introduction to this, which means I would welcome your phone call. Let's talk about how we can take your processes, map them, and evaluate them for what's adding value and what is not. Christine, thank you very much for showing us those results.
All right, here we go. First time quality. As an economic development administrator, I often am in the position of working with business owners as a liaison to monitor the process of obtaining building permits. If a company is looking to expand or they're new to Dublin, oftentimes they're under a tight deadline and they've got to be in by X date or there's going to be problems. One of the biggest complaints that I get and things that drive these business owners the craziest is when the permits are disapproved or if they're rejected, especially if they're being rejected for being incomplete. Of course, they're always want to blame the city for that, but as I found, being the insider and liaising through the process, 99.9% of the time, it's because someone on the contracting team was not doing the application correctly, whether they missed something or they named a document incorrectly. There was some problem. And as we talked about with error proofing, that's good data for us from an input side of things to look at, okay, do we need to change our process here to make it easier, again, for the customer at the end of the day. But ultimately, again, little things like this can cause major delays with costly impacts. So again, we want to do what we can to make sure that it's as easy as possible to get it done right the first time around. The City of Dublin, in terms of our building permitting process, up until a couple of years ago, we took all applications that were submitted, as long as they looked like they were more or less complete, and realized that we would encounter serious backlogs. We have a 30-day state mandate in Ohio to complete building permit reviews within 30 days, and many of them, even for the simplest projects, were running up into that 30-day deadline. Working on some process mapping and process improvement opportunities, we've gotten that down significantly to the point where initial permits are reviewed typically within 14 days, and resubmissions are completed within 7 days by and large. And a lot of that comes from really making sure that the application is 100% complete when it's submitted the first time around. We have daily essentially scrum meetings where the permit review staff gets together, make sure that everything looks good to go, and then it's submitted in queue. So as Tracy talked about, looking at the value-adding activities and making sure that when the process is done, is the customer able to get it right the first time? And really, this is important because if we get it right the first time, we avoid, again, those costly delays with fixing the problem, whatever it is. But we also enable our team as a city or as an organization, wherever you're coming from, to spend more time on value-adding work. As planners, we are all suffering from the affliction of not having enough time. This is a great way to free up more time for yourself and your team members.
Thank you, Rachel. So one of the other things about during the process is when you do encounter problems, then problems will pop up. Problems will happen. What is it? Was it Patton or Sun Tzu who said no strategy survives first contact? So once you start rolling, there are going to be problems. Keep track of them. It's great and it's heroic to solve a problem and put it to rest and move on. But it's equally important to record what those were. Record what those problems were. Record how you fixed them. Don't just fix them and forget about them and move on to the next. Keep track of what happened. So one really useful and simple tool to do that is the Pareto chart. And you can keep track of the number of problems that happened in each type of issue, just with tally marks, or with asking everybody to just tell me when, and keeping track of how many times a particular problem arose, and then you graph them. Because the one that's shown here was for a call center, and I asked them to track the reasons for their calls. It was a small call center for 2 weeks. It was a city in southwestern Ohio, and I asked them to track the reasons why people called for 2 weeks, and they did. And while they said, we get all these calls about user ID and passwords. Yes, they did. It was proven. We were able to see that there were a lot of issues around that. Those particular types of problems. So you group you count the number of times that a particular problem arose, and you rank them. And so the number 57, the tallest bar, password, goes all the way up to a 57 on the y-axis on the scale. What we want to tell you about the Pareto chart is, first, you build it, and that's good. And by the way, you don't have to only sort it by frequency. It can also be sorted by how long it takes to fix certain issues. So password might have happened 57 times, but maybe it only takes 30 seconds to fix each one, where the one that says expired only happened 12 times during those 2 weeks, but it took an hour to fix each one. That bar expired would go to the front if we were grouping them not just by how many times they happened, but how much work was involved in fixing them. But the Pareto, building the Pareto is not the end. What we want to do is, once you have the Pareto built, the Pareto chart constructed, is to look at what those are, evaluate them with your team of people, and figure out ways to resolve those issues more quickly. Once they arrive, how can we knock them down faster? How can we resolve them more quickly? And possibly, as we talked about with error proofing a minute ago, and the My Worst Nightmare game a minute ago, prevent them from happening in the first place. I have a little example. That call center in southwestern Ohio, they kept track for 2 weeks about the reasons that they got calls. And notice the third bar from the bottom says vocab. And so I asked them, what do you mean vocab? And they said vocabulary. And I said, of course you mean vocabulary. What do you mean by vocabulary? And they said, well, during these 2 weeks, 9 times people called us and they asked us about this form that they have to fill out. This form, the residents have this form that they have to fill out. And they called us and asked us for the definition of this word. They said, what is this word triplicate? Triplicate. And we said to them on the phone, not everyone likes this example, but it's reality. They said, what is the definition of this word triplicate? And we told them on the phone that we said, it means make 3 copies. They said, oh, okay, thank you very much. So what action do you think we took as a result of this study? We changed the form. We changed the form and we took the word triplicate out and we said, please make 3 copies. And all those calls go away. Now, there were 9 of them in 2 weeks. They took probably 30 seconds or 1 minute to resolve, but now we get all that time back and we move on to the next bar in your Pareto chart. So not only the tallest bars don't get all the attention, there are some wins to be found, some victories to be found in the smaller bars as well. So we want to ask you to do an assignment. We're going to give you an assignment. You certainly don't have to take us up on it, but we want to make this offer to you, Rachel and Devyani and I. If you do this, if you track the reasons for 2 weeks, roughly 2 weeks, the reasons people contact you, whether they call you or email you or instant message you or stop you at the water cooler or tap you on the shoulder, and they ask you for something, what is it that they asked you for? And if you create a Pareto chart for those, and it doesn't have to be pretty, it doesn't have to be in, a slideshow or in Excel, it could be hand drawn, you could take a picture of it. But if you create that Pareto chart of the reasons that people asked you, the things that people asked you for over a period of 2 weeks, and you send it to us, and we'll have our contact information shown at the end of this slideshow, we will call you. One of us, or all 3 of us, maybe we'll get back in this same room and we'll call you and we'll talk about ways to pick at least one of those bars on your Pareto chart, help you figure out a way to resolve it more quickly or possibly prevent it in the first place. So that is a challenge to us and to you, and we promise to help you if you do this homework. Now we're going to move into the pre-process preparation, where you can set your team and your customers up for success. We've looked at post-process, we've looked at during. Now this is the one we wanted to focus most sharply on. And I know it's 8 till the top of the hour. We might go, a little bit past the top of the hour. We'll still have time for questions, but we want to go into some of the things that you can do ahead of, before you actually begin executing the work, that are going to help you. And I'll keep the mic here while we talk about the, the billboard and then the voice of the customer. The voice of the customer is collecting those opinions, complaints, input from the customers directly, and we'll talk about how that can be done, and we'll ask you for some of your input on that as well. Rachel mentioned 30 minutes ago the SIPOC tool, and she's going to describe that. This is absolutely foundational. I can't overstress the importance of building a SIPOC. Full stop. And then the RACI that Devyani is going to go through also is another extremely useful tool before the work begins, before starting your work. So let me go into voice of the customer. And yeah, voice of the customer is getting what the customer says. But a way to look at it is that every interaction with your customer, call it a moment of truth. There's a moment of truth there. Every interaction with the customer. And some are obvious. In our world, some are obvious. A service call, somebody visits the customer directly, a town hall meeting, placing an order over the phone. They're interactive. There's somebody from the city, I'll say city since 50% of our audience is local government. But some are less obvious. If they're trying to use your website, that's a moment of truth because it's an interaction, even though you're not there. You're not there to help them. You're not there to talk to them. Receiving an incorrect statement or bill in the mail, that's an important touch point. Getting that bill, getting that statement in the mail, and we're not there to explain it to them. They open it up, and no one from the city is there. We're reading a comment about the city. That's like third party on the website or in an article. It's a moment of truth. And every moment of truth is a chance to either improve or damage your relationship with the customer. So we got to capitalize on those moments of truth. So what we want to ask, Christine, if you don't mind opening our next question, we want to ask all of you. Do we have the build on you? No. We want to ask all of you, what are your most common methods? What is your most common method for collecting the voice of the customer, collecting customer feedback? And you can see the choices on the screen are large-scale surveys, where you send a broad survey or do a telephone survey. Small-scale focus groups where you bring in your representatives of your client, feed them bagels and ask them questions. Online questions and comments from your website, or that you may even drive them to with an email campaign. Public meetings, as we talked about, where hopefully the lightning doesn't strike and no one goes crazy in the meeting. And then do we sometimes not have an active method for collecting the voice of the customer and instead take a more passive approach and wait for complaints before to come in and then work on handling those? So, Christine, if we can just let this go for maybe 10 more seconds, and we'll see what kind of responses we get.
Sounds good.
In the City of Dublin, we employ all of these methods. Yes, we happen to employ all these.
We usually don't wait for customers, we would like to say,
but when complaints,
that happens too.
But when complaints do arrive, we definitely address them. We call them Ask the Director, right?
Correct.
I remember when I first moved to Dublin 13 years ago, I got a telephone survey, and they asked several questions, and one of the questions was about the bike paths, and there were about 100 miles of bike paths, and on my street there was one discontinuous section of bike path, and I said it would be great if the city finished the bike path on my street. I love the bike path, and within 2 months, my street was finished, and since then 30 more miles of bike path have been added, haven't they? 130 miles of bike path.
Right.
So what do we got? Devyani, what do we got?
So public meetings got 33%. Yeah.
That's great. And we hope that they're well attended and that you're doing all you can to promote them and that nothing bad happens. My worst nightmare.
Right.
But we got some online questions. Large scale surveys, not the most popular method. They can be expensive. A large scale survey can be expensive to roll out and to deploy, and the results, sometimes are good for guidance, but not always very specific. The small-scale focus groups at about 12%, waiting for complaints. That's it's cathartic. I mean, this is an exercise in what works. So what we want to encourage you to do is not only collect the voice of the customer, but collect it frequently because it can become stale. And in the last several years, the needs of our customers, the needs of our developers and residents and our information technology partners, they have changed. They have evolved. I think the price of a big screen TV has been cut by more than half in that time. The needs of our customers have changed also. So stay on top of that so that before you do the work, what is the value? We talked about process mapping, evaluating what's important to the customer. Ask them, find out, and make sure that it is current.
Okay, and some of you probably are thinking, who is the customer? And really, it's going to depend on what process you're talking about. Maybe you were thinking the same thing during the value add and non-value adding question. Perhaps I was thinking, some of you were thinking about it as internal. If you're thinking of your internal customers as internal staff members, perhaps your customer is different, and what's value adding for them would be a different answer. So we've talked a lot about our X's, our inputs. We've talked about our Y's, our outputs, what we're trying to. We've talked about process mapping. This is the tool that I mentioned is my favorite. It's a great way to visualize all the high-level key pieces of the puzzle in a really, graphic, systematic way. So I mentioned this is my, like I said, my favorite tool, and I'm going to go through an example here quickly, and also talk about how to describe it, how to assemble it. So the first thing with a SIPOC, that's an acronym for sources, inputs, process, outputs, and customers. Whenever you're assembling a SIPOC, the very first step that you want to do is start with a project name and define the project scope. Many of us are familiar with the issue of scope creep. This is another great way to put very firm guardrails to error-proof that particular process, to make sure there's very clear expectation of what exactly process we're looking at, what's included, and what is not included. Here's a simple example. We like to do this one when we are doing teaching the SIPOC concept with groups of very different types of people. Everybody hopefully has a little bit of experience with growing things such as tomatoes. So for this example, we're going to grow tomatoes. And the project scope is the process of growing tomatoes from obtaining seeds to harvest. Now, the first step is we're going to start with the P. We're going to start in the middle with the process. And what are the major steps of the process? Keep in mind, this is high level. We want to have it no more than 5 to 7 steps. As we are all familiar with, and the planning and development field, it's very easy for processes to get complex. It's okay to do multiple sub-SIPOCs for sub-processes, but particularly when you're starting out with something high level, start with a 5 to 7 step process and start from there. So for here, our 5 or 7 steps are: 1, get seeds; 2, find the best spot to plant; 3, get dirt; 4, plant seeds; 5, water seeds; 6, manage the growing process; and 7, harvest tomatoes. So the key here, you got to have a little bit of a grammar sense here. We want to start with a verb. Everything should be action oriented and have an object. That's how this should be constructed. So next we're going to move to the outputs. Number 2, the Y's. So this is the result. We want to have, in the growing tomatoes process, we want to have ripe tomatoes. But we also want to think about what we don't want to happen. My worst nightmare in this situation is I've spent all this time and I still end up with rotten tomatoes. And it's not enough to just say, well, I want ripe tomatoes and I don't want rotten tomatoes. The key here, and really what feeds into all the other tools that we talked about, are how can we measure success? So for ripe tomatoes, we want to make sure that it tastes great. It's a bright red or yellow or whatever type of tomato that we're looking for. It's the right size. It has sufficient water to grow, enough sunlight. It's in a protected growing area. We keep it away from pests. It's not going to be subject to blight or any other things that could make a tomato not taste optimally. So it's really important to think about what are the measurables. How do we know we did a good job? How do we get it right the first time around? Next, we're going to move to the customers. So ideally, for each of these outputs, you could have different customers depending on the context that you're working on. This one is a simple example. Customers here, hopefully yourself. Hopefully you get to enjoy the fruits of your labor. Maybe you'll share it with your family if you get enough and you like them well enough to share. Maybe you have a bumper crop and you share some with friends and neighbors, and even decide to take some to a farmer's market. Be as specific as possible. Next, we're going to move to the inputs. So these are each of the things that are required for each individual step. So you'll want to look at each step in the process and be very, very specific and break it down of what are all the individual inputs necessary for each of those process steps. And again, really focusing on metrics here. What are the specific measurables, or how do you know you're going to be successful? Because again, if you have something that results in Rotten Tomatoes, you can go back and look at each of the steps and each of the inputs and look at where you need to tweak the process to result in a different output. And finally, looking at the sources. This is a great way to, again, look at identifying stakeholders. This is a good way to bring to light, I've found in my experience, of people or groups or individuals that might not be obvious, but as you start mapping the process, other groups or individuals come to light that wouldn't otherwise be if you were just setting out on a project management process. So this is a great way to, again, help you determine if a process was successful, but the key here is as defined by the customer. Again, it helps define and clarify the relationship between process inputs and outputs. And again, the more detailed the analysis of those inputs and outputs, the easier it is to identify gaps as well as improvement opportunities. So lastly, just to close out this slide here, again, it's a great visual to depict the work being done that shows required inputs and desired outputs that can help in identifying those improvement opportunities. And sometimes it's also good to explain the work that you do to other people on your team, new employees. If they're coming in, you're trying to get them quickly acclimated to a particular process. It's just a great visual and tool that really, as Tracy mentioned, underpins a lot of the other tools that we've talked about today.
That's great. So next tool is RACI, and it's very helpful tool if you do it right after SIPOC that Rachel just explained. R in RACI stands for responsible, A is accountable, C is consulted, and I is informed. This tool is valuable so everyone knows what everyone owns. So we are going to continue with the same example that Rachel had, the project of growing tomatoes. So in this chart, as you can see on the left side, it lists all the process steps that SIPOC was helpful in identifying, including get seeds, look for right spot, get dirt, and so on. And next 4 columns, we have identified the contributors in this project. So gardener, spouse, child, and farm market. So let's see, responsible is the person who is actually doing this task. So sometimes it can be more than 1 people, but it's really helpful to minimize that number. In case of getting seeds, we are making our spouse responsible. And gardener is definitely accountable for this process, and he or she makes sure the spouse has brought the seeds. And we can certainly consult farm market people. They will let us know if it's good or bad. Getting dirt, that's another step that's identified here. We are making child responsible in that task. Certainly they are expert in doing that, but spouse is informed, and farm market is consulted, and gardener is accountable. The accountable is a person who owns this task, and it's usually beneficial if you keep it to one person so there is less confusion. Consulted is a person who is assisting with that task. They'll provide information useful for completing that particular step. Informed is just to keep them aware. These people or groups will kept up to date with this task. RACI is very helpful with clear communication, avoiding work overload and silos, and setting clear expectations. This tool has been very helpful for me, not only just for projects, but when new team members join in, like Rachel mentioned, it sets up the expectation. It's clear who is doing what, and it's clear who they have to consult or inform during the whole entire project process.
Amen. Let there never be a time when someone doesn't know what is expected. Okay, so oops.
All right, sorry about that. Here we go.
All right, so we are nearing the end of our presentation, and we'll open it to questions here in a second, Christine. We just wanted to recap that we showed you a couple of tools that can be helpful in preparing for success before the work, SIPOC and RACI, and collecting the voice of the customer. And that during the work, you can watch what's happening, you can record what's happening so that you know where problems are and what is driving success. You map the process, you ensure first-time quality, and you can use your Pareto chart to track the problems in order to learn how to overcome them more quickly and possibly resolve them in the first place, which is error proofing, which is one of our post-work tools, measuring the success, not just the whys or the outputs of the process, but the X's, the drivers, the inputs. Measure those so that you can predict success and prevent failure. We have been very happy to present. We are interested in your practical applications of Lean in planning. So if you're able to type any of those into the question box, Christine, I don't know how much of it we can see, but we'll ask you for your translation or transcription of those comments to us, practical applications of things that we maybe have already shared or ideas about how you could apply that. We want to talk about those with you in the remaining time that we have on this. So we're going to put our contact information on the screen with Devyani and Rachel working for the City of Dublin. I am their visiting guest consultant for these last couple of years, and any of these email addresses you can use to send us your Pareto chart. Definitely don't forget your assignment. Should you choose to accept it, we will talk it through with you.
Thank you.
I guess we'll leave it here for a sec. Okay.
So folks, again, you can type those questions into the questions chat box on your GoToWebinar tool panel. And as a reminder, we are recording the session. We will put it up on our YouTube channel at the conclusion of today's session. And we will have a PDF of the presentation available, and we'll also post that on our webcast webpage, ohioplanning.org/planning webcast. So like I said, type those questions in, and also please don't use the raise your hand function because you don't have a voice. You can only type, you have fingers. So please use that option versus the raise your hand option, if you don't mind. So let's jump into some questions. The first thing, let's just talk super big picture. And I think this is probably for Tracy, could you please explain what Lean Six Sigma is and what it means to be a black belt or a yellow belt or an orange belt, or what is this? Could you explain it to everybody?
Absolutely love the inquisitive nature of this question. There is so much more that we can talk about. I teach, as Devyani mentioned, the black belts, and a black belt is it's a karate reference. Sure, it's a karate reference because a lot of this material was either formed or expanded in Japan, specifically in Japanese automotive manufacturing. Toyota production system. Toyota was a pioneer of lean thinking. Lean means only do exactly what is required to get the job done. Figure out what is important to the customer and deliver only that. You could tell somebody in a factory, your job is to make good parts only, right? And that's it. No, we're not wasting time. We're not wasting any effort. And there are so many things that can go into that. In our setting, it is figure out what's important, figure out how we're going to deliver that, and deliver that every single time. We're not going to waste time. Lean thinking was promulgated in the early 90s. Jim Womack and Daniel Jones wrote the book Lean Thinking, and the other book, The Machine That Changed the World, that introduced lean thinking to a wider audience. I have deployed lean in banks and insurance companies in addition to manufacturing companies. And as I mentioned at the outset, it works everywhere, but it does take a little bit of research and and certainly a lot of practice. We have had, 70 minutes with you so far, and we have a few more. So it's very difficult. As Devyani mentioned, 15 sessions over 7 months is what I was able to spend with these candidates who are now black belts, and they took that 4.5-hour American Society for Quality black belt certification exam, which is a grueling, a difficult test, and they passed it because they have the right approach and are not bashful about statistics and math. Black belt is not for everybody. It is absolutely a statistical pursuit, but once you cross into that realm, it changes the way you look at work. So the inquisitive nature of this question, we absolutely love it. I can barely do enough justice to Six Sigma, in the confines of this call. My contact information is on the screen. Please send me a note. I would be delighted to talk with you about this. If you can't tell, I love talking about Lean and Six Sigma. I teach in at Ohio State, at Capital University in Columbus, at University of Dayton, at Ohio University, and in addition to private black belt training. And I get them for weeks and weeks and weeks, and there's still so much more that we can go into. I've done this job for 20 years. I'm a master black belt certified quality engineer, and I'm still eager to learn more and more about this as it all evolves. I probably over-answered that, Christine, but I probably also missed some of the important details that the questioner was looking for.
That's fine. If you have any more questions, you know who to ask. All right, next question, and this one, we had several of them. So if you could, let me see. Let me get one down here. Here we go. So it's no small investment to train staff at any of these levels. How do you create or encourage an organizational culture that will value and then invest in and make time for process improvement?
Well, this is Rachel, and I'll start, and I'll let Tracy jump in as needed here from his experience across the country. So really, this came from our city manager. He obviously has a background in public administration and the military, and as I said, he's always asking, are we winning, and how do we know we're winning? So, in Dublin in particular, this is something that, and we also have, as Devyani mentioned, a reputation to protect. We know that we are known for being innovative and forward-thinking and best in class for what we do. So that was a conscious decision of our city leadership, and our council approved our budget to allow for this type of professional development training. And staff members who had the interest and aptitude to go through the black belt training did so. And the other staff members who perhaps just didn't have the time or interest or just didn't make sense for whatever reason, but still, again, from a cultural standpoint, wanted to understand general process improvement concepts, went through the yellow and green belt training, which are typically range from half day to 1 to 2 day workshops. And senior leadership just perpetuates in regular staff leadership meetings. Again, that question, how do we know we're winning? And that's really underpinned by the PyWorks concepts of what we do to make sure that we can answer those questions with certainty, with the metrics and the data to back it up.
And we are fortunate to go through this training. It's 13 of us who are black belts, but we also serve the staff of about 500. So the ratio is quite large. And 13 of us can be deployed in any department. So we are a resource to the entire city. So that helps a little bit. Not everyone has to go this training. It's only a champion or a leader or whoever is interested, like Rachel mentioned, has aptitude and time to go through this training, has done that, and we can be a resource to other people.
And then just if there's a question behind the question, an organization that maybe is interested in dipping their toe into this pool, what we did in 2014 was educate, with a couple day session, just a handful of people using funds that were actually available from the state of Ohio. At the time, that legislation was not renewed in 2016, but in 2014 it was available. So we were able to send a number of people from Dublin. But the question is always, can you prove it? Yeah, this is a good thing to know, and I feel smarter or whatever, but can you prove it? So the first action we took was in the summer of 2015. We ran 1 2-day Kaizen event in our building review services department, and it was about the focus was to accelerate the process of reviewing building plans, commercial and residential, because from their level that they were taking about 21 days on average, and the backlog was about 35 projects perpetually. And in those 2 days, in the 2 non-consecutive days, we did Thursday one day and Thursday 1 week and the following Friday the next week. I tend to break up my Kaizen events. I don't like them all, together, because it's just too much to ask for people's time like that in those big blocks of time. But after those 2 days, within 2 weeks after that, we had cut the backlog from 35 to single digits, 35 projects down to single digits, and the turnaround time is now between 11 and 14 days, and has been maintained over these last 4 years. So that saves money, it creates a more positive customer experience, and it makes the workload easier to manage. We changed the sequence of meetings. We changed the priorities. We changed, like Rachel said, not accepting incomplete applications. We did a number of tactical improvements that the team identified. I didn't go in and say, here's how you're going to do it. I'm the facilitator. The team comes up with the answers. They just need the guidance to be able to do it. So if you're interested in, exploring this further, my recommendation is start with one project. And if that's a winner, and I think we called that one a home run, 4 years ago, if that's a winner, it's going to start to show that level of support, start to build that support that you need.
Thank you. We have a couple of these questions. Can you explain the difference between responsible and accountable in the RACI example?
Yes. So responsible is a person who is actually doing the task. So they're responsible for getting the work done or making the decision. And accountable is a person or a role who's responsible for overall completion of the task. So I see it as sometimes in long-range planning project, I'm responsible for getting the task, but the director of the department, he's accountable, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a good example,
Yeah.
Devyani. The accountable is answerable, answerable. The buck stops here. And one thing that's really important in the RACI chart is that there is one and only one A for every task. There can't be, I'm accountable, you're accountable, you're accountable. There is one accountable person, not department, in the RACI for each task. So for each of those tasks, there's one A. There could be, as Devyani mentioned, multiple R's, people who actually do the job. So as an example, if the signature on a certificate of plans approval is the chief building official or the zoning director, right? That is the accountable person for making sure that everything was done leading up to that affixing that signature. That's accountability. The responsible parties are the ones who are going to do the step-by-step work to deliver that certificate of plans approval to the chief building official in order to affix that signature. So the R's are those who execute the task. The A is the one who is accountable for that having been done. And by the way, just on that RACI, if there's another question about that, R and A, are about doing the task. C, the consulted, are people you ask for input before you do the work, right? So consulted is before you do the work. And I, for informed, are those people who you make aware that the job has been done after it's been done. So that's why there's, 4 distinct roles on the RACI chart. Thank you for the question.
Thanks. Now we have a couple questions regarding the value to the customer, or in a case where this next question, how do you recommend dealing with process or steps, department activities that don't directly deliver value to the customer, but are required by higher levels of government? So how are we implementing this process when it's not something that's direct value to a customer?
Okay, so I have 2 answers for that, and I think Devyani has some additional. One answer, and I'll keep this one really short. But before 2014, I was not public sector, so I walked in with fresh eyes, like that. Oh, help me understand. And when I saw things like 3 levels of approval, like we had in our value question a little bit ago, and the people around the table were saying, yes, we require the supervisor, the manager, the director to sign off on all these. I said, really? Help me understand why. And they said, well, that's how it's in the code. And I said, really? Please show me in the code where it's written that you have, and it's not there. It's not there. It says that it even says in some of the codes for these in Ohio and in Franklin County can be delegated, or director signature, not the 3 levels below it. It's their response to how that's been done. Now, that's not the answer you're looking for. The answer that you're looking for is this one, my second half to this, and that is if any of you was ever an athlete in track and field, or if you've watched anything like the Penn relays or the Olympics, the hurdle race. This is my best metaphor. That regulatory requirements are a hurdles race. It's a race in hurdles, and the way you win a hurdles race is, yes, you got to stay in step. Yes, you got to stay in your lane, but also you will clear the hurdle by the minimal margin possible. and you don't stub your toe. This metaphor works, right? Stay in your lane, stay in step, don't stub your toe, but also clear the hurdle only by as much as is required. Don't do any more work than is absolutely necessary to meet that regulatory requirement.
No, that's great. Thank you.
I hope that that's satisfactory, but if there's a specific case, definitely send a question to any of the three of us and we'll help you talk through it.
I think maybe just while Christine's getting the next question, the only other thing that I would suggest is, again, if you can think about it as a continuum and a process improvement opportunity, if you can look at some small wins and help leadership, see the value and if there is future process improvement opportunities, it could take a while, but perhaps through showing cost savings and time savings and customer, satisfaction surveys, there might be an opportunity to influence changes down the line, starting with some small wins.
Thank you. And also, that's just one of the questions further back was, how do we relate this to the higher ups and tell them this is what we need to do, especially when you're trying to implement something like this from the ground up versus for the City of Dublin's case, it was sort of the up down, where it was someone higher up who was like, we need to do this. So this is
Right.
would be a really good opportunity to kind of test the waters and then, go to those that make the decisions and say, see, look how this worked. Which leads me then to my next question. Is there a library of process maps so communities don't have to start from scratch, but maybe kind of start from a template and kind of, dip your toes in the water and sort of just internally try this process out to see if it works for you?
I don't know if the library is a good example because I think every process is unique. I mean, when I say that I've been involved, not too many, but at least 4 different projects, and seriously, every process is different. It's a painful process sometimes, but it is very, very, very valuable to get everyone in a room and do it with them. I mean, it takes time, but like I said in our example here, just doing that, it uncovered so many inefficiencies that everyone saw, and once we worked together, people bought into it for improvement. Yep. So yeah, it's buy-in that people. I mean, we have to have buy-in from people who are contributing to the process. So I'm sure there are resources, but I don't know if we can use any templates for best process per se.
Now, I have a SIPOC diagram that I'm more than happy to share. I'm such a passionate fan of these that if anybody wants to send me a note, I'd be happy to share that. But if there are other types of resources that people can reference, Tracy, I don't know if you have any suggestions.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I don't know if we misinterpreted that question. If there was a library or of templates, absolutely yes. We can share it. We can help with templates, and there are templates out at ASQ.org and i6sigma.com. There are templates. It's that other site that has all the forms. There are a lot of other, as far as maps of actual processes from which you could maybe, pattern your work. I mean, if there was a brand new city that was starting out with nothing, like a brand new city, we could give them some process maps and say, here's how Dublin does it. I mean, that's one thing. But if we misinterpreted the question and it was more about templates, absolutely yes, there are so many templates and tools that can be used in lots of different formats, Visio, Excel, PowerPoint, Word documents, that can be really helpful as a starting point.
I thought if they were looking for like pre-done process, the best process, well, I misinterpreted.
Oh no, I think I did.
Thank you. So next question. This one is a little more micro in scale, but I think it's still going to be really applicable. And the first line just made me laugh. It says, people no longer read anything. So this is the person asking the question. Oh, it's so true. It's so true. So the question is, well, first it's a comment. We have streamlined many of our forms to remove non-value added information, and still our customers will not respond to the most basic information on the form. And I suspect there's a lot of people like bobbing their heads up and down right now. So how else can we screen this for process improvement? Or is this just another sign of the times?
Okay, so error proofing sometimes equals hand holding. Like, how are we actually going to make this happen? But I'll give you one example, and yeah, maybe it's a little bit, specific. But one example, I have a few other clients in this area, some other cities, Gahanna, New Albany, and some of the surrounding areas. And I have Franklin County and Delaware County. And up in Delaware County, one thing that we did to try to change behavior, where people would call for, specifically call for the status of their inspection. Like, when's my inspection? When's my building inspection going to happen? And they would call. And of course, phone calls are to be avoided if at all possible. I mean, phone calls, maybe with enjoyable people are good, but phone calls to answer a question, I look at them almost always as a distraction from me doing my work. So let's find another way to do this. And like at one place, I encourage the use of voicemail, so you can prepare for when you do call them back. But in Delaware County, what we did was we had the recorded, I'll try to keep this short. We had the recorded greeting at the other end of the phone when someone called the inspection hotline. We had the recorded greeting. The first thing the recorded greeting would say was, for the status of inspections, please go to delcoinspections.us. We took out that URL. Like, it's still available. And they've even added things onto it. But we took out a new URL for like $2.99. The U.us, and we said go to delcoinspections.us to schedule or to check on the status of your inspection. And then we started a 90-second long voice message, at the end of which we enabled somebody to push 8 for an attended person or 5 in an attempt to drive behavior. We gave them at the very beginning where to go instead of calling us, go to this website, and then didn't allow them to push a button until 80 seconds later. And you know what? The voice messages dropped off significantly, and the web hits on delcoinspections.us went up. Was it creative? Was it insidious? I don't know. Was it puppet master? I don't know, but it worked. So there's always a way. There's always, as we said at the outset, there's always a way to make things better. There's always a solution. And understanding also that people don't read anything anymore. Let me just tell you that my email address is 3-point, POINT, @att.net, just in case no one's willing to read it on the screen.
That's funny. Thank you. I think it's 2:29. So I think we're going to wrap up now. There's a few questions left, but folks, just go ahead and email one of our panelists and they will absolutely get back to you. So thanks to the three of you for joining us today. I think this is just a really interesting topic, and I love the passion that you three have for it. And just from some of the comments that are coming through, your passion is sort of trailing off into these folks too. So I think you're going to have to expect some emails coming in with a lot of great questions. Everyone, thanks for joining us. We, again, are recording this webcast. It will be available on our YouTube channel. Just search Planning Webcast on YouTube, and we will have a PDF of this presentation available on our webcast webpage. Just head over to ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. So thanks again, everyone, and thanks to the Ohio chapter for sponsoring today's webcast. And everyone, have a great weekend.